Katie, thank you very much. Katie Pilgrim. Well, one reason perhaps so many important pieces of legislation aren't making it through Congress is because, well, Congress works so little. Congress has just returned from a week-long 4th of July recess and will work about 5 weeks before taking another break. This is when members of Congress and senators return to their home districts for what's called the summer district work period. Congress returns to Washington well after Labor Day. The Senate resumes voting on the 8th of September. It will adjourn on the 26th of September, so the senators can get back to what they do best, campaigning. And the Senate has only 29 remaining working days until the end of the year, but who's counting? The Bush administration and this democratically led Congress have done very little to help most Americans with our worsening economic crisis. It may well be up to independent voters to pressure the presidential candidates to do something, if anything at all is possible, to solve the crises that face us. Joining me now, David Sirota. He's the author of the important book, The Uprising, an unauthorized tour of the populist revolt scaring Wall Street and Washington. Oh, I like the sound of that. And Paul Mallow, author of Chain of Blame, and it's out next week. Is that right, Paul?
It's out now.
It's out now. Well, let's get to the bookstores now. Chain of Blame, How Wall Street Caused the Mortgage and Credit Crisis. And David K. Johnson, he's the author of Free Lunch, How the Wealthiest Americans Enrich Themselves at Government Expense. Another terrific book. I think we're 3 for 3 here tonight. David, good to have you with us as well.
Thank you, Lou.
Let's start with this Senate legislation, the freeze in the Senate on legislation that would help those, or at least would purport to help those facing foreclosure. Why can't anything happen here?
Well, it boils down to money in politics and lobbyists. They're trying to figure out what exactly they should do with a program called the FHA, a federal insurance program. And the question is, they're tinkering with the nuances here on the bill, having to do with something called gifting, how much of a down payment someone can make and get an FHA loan. And there's a lot of lobbyists involved, and there's a lot of struggling homeowners out there. But what they need to do is create a floor for the housing market, and any bit of federal help aid would help right now, and that's what we need to get through this crisis, set a floor, and this bill should get passed.
As Katie Pilgrim just reported, 3 months at this point, and that action has not been taken. What in the world is this so-called democratically led Congress? I say so-called because I can't see any sign of leadership whatsoever on the part of either Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid. What's going on?
Well, look, I think the last point was right. It's that this is a Congress that is controlled in many ways by big money. You've got the presidential candidates who are also in the throes of being pushed and pulled by issues of big money. You saw that on the FISA bill with giving immunity to telecom companies. You see it on this bill. You see it on their dances on issues like trade. Should we expand and extend NAFTA? There's not really much of an answer. So you have money essentially gridlocking Congress.
David, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the banks don't want to take a big haircut on these loans after they collected the fees. And unfortunately, the way the system works with the securitization of these loans and selling them off is you can't go into your bank anymore and say, hi, I need a forbearance. I want to make some arrangements so I can keep my house, because they'll tell you, well, I'm sorry, we sold the loan. We can't negotiate with you. Right. That's a real core problem in this.
Well, there's another core problem. That is, David, the Congress has a 9% approval rating. I mean, that's an all-time
It's that high?
It's that high. I agree with you, by the way, David. I can't imagine who those 9% are. These are bumbling buffoons. And by the way, they're making the preceding Republican do-nothing Congress look like a bunch of, just wildly excitable, ambitious people.
But I think what this shows is this just shows how angry the country is generally at the political system. I think we're at a moment now where people don't think the government's just not doing anything. People see that the government is participating in the crises at hand. The government not doing something on energy has something to do with gas prices. The government not doing something on the mortgage crisis has something to do with the mortgage crisis. This is a level, these numbers are an expression of anger.
Yeah, I agree with David 100%. I think these numbers show that people are beginning to recognize that many of their economic problems are the result of government policies that favor large corporations and the rapacious among the rich over their interests.
Well, that's interesting, because you wrote, Paul, that in your book that you didn't believe that the current crisis, housing crisis, credit market crisis, was brought on by deregulation, but at the same time you felt that it was pretty clear that the
They
failure to
didn't
regulate.
Well, that was a problem in chain of blame. We note that they didn't deregulate like they did with the savings and loans. They deregulated the savings and loans. Everyone went crazy making junk bonds and big commercial loans. But here they just didn't regulate. The SEC was asleep at the wheel, which Lou Ranieri pointed out in late 2006. And lo and behold, they're packaging these subprime loans into bonds, and the investor doesn't know what's in them really. And they're being sold overseas, and they're just trusting their bond salesmen on Wall Street. The SEC
meanwhile, we're
was
talking about
asleep.
2.5 million people this year, 1.5 million people last year. We're facing foreclosure. We've seen Bear Stearns get bailed out. We've heard this. I promised my wife I wouldn't call Henry Paulson names anymore. The Treasury Secretary, with his demonstrated incompetence, again, talk about there's not anything they can do for those being foreclosed upon. This is absolutely nuts.
And this has the chance, I think, to change our politics fundamentally. This is what I reported in my book, is that there is really an uprising. People are really angry, and people are actually taking action. You see people, I saw people organizing new unions in new constituencies. I saw people down at the border, the Minutemen down at the border, about that's a right-wing kind of protest to what's going on. There is a fundamental anger here at the politics of big money.
You say in your book, David, whether in populist uprising, you say whether it is economic issues or the Iraq War, if we could put this up, there we go. Whether it's economic issues or the Iraq War, there remains an enormous gap that mortally threatens the uprising. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that there's a gap between what the public wants and what the government is doing. We have consensus positions on what the public wants. The public opposes this war. The public doesn't want more NAFTA trade deals. The public wants a government that's cleaned up from big money, and that's not what the government is giving them. And so there is this uprising where people are saying enough is enough.
Well, the public needs a lobbyist, though. They don't have a lobbyist in the mortgage fight.
Right.
They don't have a dog in this fight, so to speak. And I think a lot of the public, they feel lost in the mortgage crisis. They feel there's no one there to help them. And they certainly feel that Congress isn't doing a whole heck of a lot these days with it. So they need someone to be their advocate, so to speak. And I don't see it happening. It would be great to see a candidate grab the mortgage issue by the throat and do something with it.
David, you get the last word here.
Well, a lot of the mortgage crisis is manufactured. About 70% of the people who are in subprime mortgages in the last few years would have qualified for a regular mortgage. But the big fees up front result in their being put into bad mortgages.
Right.
The banking industry should take the haircut on that, and we should get it resolved before we have whole neighborhoods going to hell in a handbasket.
Hell in a handbasket. David, I always expect a former reporter for the Times to elevate the discourse, and I couldn't agree with you more, partner. David K. Johnson, thank you. David Sirota, Palmolive, thank you.